Shade gardening and design. So, hi, I'm Heather Day. I started working in the landscape garden industry in the year 2000 when I was 14, and I opened Daydreams Consulting in 2021. I worked at a lot of the local nurseries in the Williamson County area, like Wolf Nursery, Round Rock Gardens, Forever Gardens, Hillside Nursery, The Yard Hand, and then I started Daydreams Consulting. So I understand the struggles of shade gardening because my backyard lighting ranges from full sun to deep shade. And that's my dog, Indiana. She's awesome. What we need to understand first is lighting. How much sun does your area get? Sun exposure is measured by how long the sunlight directly hits your plant. Hours of direct sunlight. We have shade, which is up to 3 hours. That includes deep shade, indirect light, filtered sun, and dappled shade. Part sun is when you get 3 to 6 hours of sunlight. That includes morning sun and afternoon sun. And then we have full sun, which is 6 or more hours of sun. And yes, that includes the blazing Texas sun, which can be really intense. This diagram is kind of an example of direct sunlight when we're talking about a mature oak tree. So, how much light you're going to get where around an oak tree. Because I know a lot of us are dealing with these just really massive, beautiful oaks. But then we have the shade, which is challenging because our grass won't grow and we just don't know what to do with it. So, first we have morning sun. Morning sun is great. Most plants love it. It's gentle, it's nice, it feels great on our skin, and it does for the plants too. This is the perfect spot for your ferns and stuff. They really just love gentle morning sun. And then we have afternoon sun. I mean, you get out there 4 o'clock walking down the street, sometimes in the middle of the Texas summer, you just want to die. Well, so do your plants. The, a few hours of afternoon sun, even though technically that might be considered shade, it could burn some of your little ferns and some of the other plants. You just have to be really careful when you're dealing with the afternoon sun, even if you're dealing with a shade garden. Best thing to do would be, talk to some of your friends who deal with afternoon sun, even a very limited amount, or at that point, call a professional and see what they recommend. So, after talking about the different types of sun and how many hours and the importance of this when it comes to choosing your plants, what's going to be incredibly helpful for you designing your own garden, and also when you go to hire a designer, it's tracking your lighting. This information is so valuable because your designer might go out there at 9 o'clock in the morning and they're seeing just this beautiful, beautiful morning sun. And they might not realize, oh, you got a little afternoon sun creeping in there. They may not know. So if you can take pictures once an hour from about 9 to 6, it is so, so helpful in mapping your lighting. In most cases, when you take these pictures, you don't need to worry about labeling them because we can look into the metadata and see when the picture was taken. So just take the pictures. It's so helpful. So, so helpful. What happens when your plants are growing in not enough sun? So they'll always, always reach for the sun to get more. So you'll see that first. The branches will kind of arch and the leaves will turn towards the sun. Uh, they'll also get pretty leggy, sparse foliage. They're not going to bloom as well. The performance and the health overall is just kind of going to suck. Now, if your plants are in too much sun, you'll notice they're going to get really, really compact. Some of the leaves could get really bleached out. You'll see burned areas on the leaves. They're they can eventually just die from getting too much sun. So when you're dealing with too much shade, the first thing you'll probably notice is your grass. It's not going to perform as well in the shade. So Bermuda grass needs about 5 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. St. Augustine and most of your zoysia varieties need at least 4 hours. When The grass isn't getting enough. It starts to really thin out, leaving bare spots. It's more open to fungal infections that are ridiculous to continue treating over time. Sometimes people will trim up their trees to get a little more lighting in there, and that's very costly, especially if you're doing it every couple of years. It's just not worth it. So, this is the time that we would really start looking into just creating a shade garden to take care of that issue. So now that we understand the lighting and how it affects our plants, let's design a shade garden. All right, first things first. What we need to do is recreate a forest floor. Okay. If you can imagine all the leaves and debris and bug activity, everything going on a forest floor, that's really what we need to recreate to create kind of the best situation for our new plants going in. Easiest way to do that is to add compost to any new beds and you protect that soil with mulch. Do not use dyed mulches. They're terrible. Dyed mulch can harm all of the beneficial microorganisms. It leaches out chemicals. It breaks down very, very, very slowly, and it can damage the soil's whole ecosystem. So just don't use it. I like the Texas native hardwood mulch for our area. It's great. So here's the thing. Some landscapers go around and say that you need to put weed barrier under your mulch. I don't know where this started, where it came from, but it's ridiculous. Please do not do it. You can see again when you're thinking of the forest floor, when the leaves and the debris fall down on top of the bare soil, what happens is it breaks down and you've got bugs tunneling through there, earthworms pulling those nutrients and materials, debris down into the soil. And that's how you get the rich soil on a forest floor. So if you put a weed barrier in between the best stuff and the dirt, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be terrible. So just never, ever, ever use weed barrier under mulch. So you would use weed barrier under rock. They should really rename it to rock soil barrier. But do you want to use rock in a shade garden? You can, but what you have to take into consideration is the maintenance involved in doing that because you've got a lot of debris that's going to fall down into that rock because most of our shade gardens are under trees. So if you got all those leaves and everything falling down, you need to get them out. You need to get them out of that rock and off the top of that weed barrier, which sometimes requires you moving the rocks around, like usually with a high powered blower. So if this is something that you're maintaining, just consider how long that might take you to do because you do not want to leave that debris on top of the barrier. Really, you want it working into the soil. But hey, if you're going to do rock, totally cool, but you got to get it out. Um, some landscapers are pretty good at that. Some of them you have to tell them, "Hey, move the rock around with that blower. Really get that stuff out of there because it's just going to create a germination mat. Weeds are going to grow in there. You're going to eventually lose your rocks, and it's going to be a really expensive project later on if you don't take care of it every year." If you're planning a landscape project in Sun City or another neighborhood that has pretty strict HOA guidelines, definitely familiarize yourself with those guidelines before you even start with the design process. It can be a massive headache if you come up with this beautiful design and it does not fit within the guidelines. So you can do that, or if you just don't want the headache, call a landscape designer, one that's familiar with the rules, and if you need paperwork done as well, someone who's familiar with that and the whole process. It really takes a load off of you. I would suggest calling Daydreams Consulting if you need anything like that. But really, whoever you could even get with a friend who's more familiar with the process, but definitely learn the rules before you start. Which landscape style is usually used in shade gardens? Well, I mean, most likely you're going to see the woodland style. It's got a lot of ferns, a lot of lush plants, not a whole lot of color except for green. But honestly, you can do whatever style you want to do. You can have a tropical shade garden, a Spanish shade garden, a French shade garden if that's your style. That one's very formal. But you do whatever you want to do, and you don't even have to have a particular style. You maybe just like these plants and want to stick those plants in there. That's totally fine. So don't constrict yourself with a particular design style. Plant options for the shade garden. All right. So what I'm focused on here is shade, not part shade. Shade is the most difficult thing to figure out what to do with, and so this list of plants should be pretty good for Central Texas. There may be a few more, but these are kind of the easy go-to ones. So for your bigger plants, you're going to want Japanese Aurelia, Japanese Akuba, Leatherleaf Mahonia. Those are a few really good options. Medium-sized plants, you've got cast iron plant, Harbor Dwarf Nandina, which is one of the better Nandinas for shade. Giant leopard plant, dwarf pittosporum, not if you have deer. Dwarf yopon holly, wood fern, inland sea oats, variegated ginger. That one's an awesome one to really brighten it up. But that one, sometimes you can get a little frost damage on the gingers. Some smaller plants would be like your holly fern, ajuga, liriope, Asian jasmine, oxalis, vinca. Vinca gets some worms in the summertime, so kind of be aware of that. BT worm killer works great. Coral bells, Ruellia. When I say Ruellia, I mean dwarf Katy Ruellia. Not there's a bigger one out there and it's highly invasive. Your dwarf Katy Ruellias are pretty well controlled. You might get an extra one here or there, but that's kind of more of a blessing than it is a a curse. And then annuals. Here's where you get the most impact. Sweet potato vines, impatiens, especially New Guinea impatiens. Those are awesome. Coleus, I think your bright colored coleus, caladiums, and even houseplants. You can get houseplants and treat them like an annual, or you can get houseplants and bring them inside in the winter. So if you just want, a small list of plants to choose from because you don't really care about this garden, you just need to get some plants in there that are going to survive. Go with cast iron, Harbor Dwarf Nandina, liriope, and holly fern. They're great, easy. They're all evergreen. They'll be interesting looking and very, very worry free. All right, let's start designing. So here's a typical backyard with a mature oak tree. The time in this picture is about 12 o'clock, so you can really see where the shade is midday. So we're going to start with Japanese Aurelia. This is a taller plant that kind of goes in the backdrop. It's a pretty cool plant, evergreen, pretty worry-free. And then we're going to add some Japanese Akuba. These are so interesting with their little gold dusted leaves, and these guys are evergreen too, so it's a nice addition. Let's add some color and texture with Nandina. Again, that Harbor Dwarf Nandina takes to shade a little bit better, though most of the varieties can handle it. These guys are going to kind of blush a burgundy in the winter, which is just really awesome and adds more interest. Now we're going to add some cast iron plants. I love cast iron plants. They're very structural and just different and interesting. They kind of add like a weight to the landscape, which is real fun. Um, and then we have holly ferns. Holly ferns are great. Again, another kind of heavy, more of an anchoring plant, evergreen, pretty great plant. So now you can see the landscape. It's looking pretty good, but everything's kind of starting to blend together and just look like kind of a mass of green. So we need to figure out what to do to break everything up. And this is where we would add some hardscape features. So in this design, I added 3 pots. I added a bird bath and some stepping stones. Just doing that just makes everything else look good. We really needed something like that to break it up. Now let's add a ground cover. This really helps to add some texture and a little more interest while not taking away too much from the other plants and the hardscape features. We need to soften everything a little bit, and I think just adding a few liriope with its really delicate kind of airy texture is going to help a lot to soften the landscape. Now, the fun part. We're going to brighten this all up. We're going to add some sweet potato vine. Now, keep in mind, sweet potato vine can get a little out of hand. It can become a monster. But if you plant it in a pot and you're not afraid to get out there with your nippers and just nip on it every now and then, it's going to be amazing. Gosh, it adds so much interest and just makes it pop in the garden. And then after that, you can add some houseplants or tropicals. I love doing this. I have this massive dragon wing begonia that I put out every year and then I put in my greenhouse every winter. And it just adds so much with its character and the color, the blooms. It's amazing. It's amazing. Then I've got a few nephritis and things like that, little house plants that I do. I move in the greenhouse every winter, but whenever I take them away from the bed to put them in the greenhouse, I look at the bed and I'm like, this is terrible. It's terrible. I mean, sure, I have plenty of great plants that work, but I've gotten so used to the value that these houseplants really truly adds to the gardens. So give it a shot. It's worth it, in my opinion, it really is. And then final touches with annual color. In this design, I used caladiums to bring some kind of really, really pretty hot pink color in there, but they've got white caladiums, red caladiums, just across the board colors. And then I added New Guinea impatiens. They're they're wonderful. They're a little bit bigger than your regular impatiens, and they just really, really bring your eye in. The light pink ones and the white ones, they really do. The other smaller impatiens are really great too. And of course, neither of these are good if you have deer, so be careful with that. So, a few final tips here. Um, You'll notice in that design there's some space between, some negative space in the garden. Sometimes the space between is just as important as the plants you choose and where you plant them. It can really highlight what you have planted in there, and it's just pay attention to the space between. So, to brighten up a shade garden, consider incorporating lime green plants or foliage with white variegation. You can also add plants that bloom like a white or a light pink color. Use light colored pots like white pots or decor like your stepping stones. Use limestone stepping stones. It really will bring your eye right in. Reds and burgundies, those plants tend to really blend in with the ground in a shade garden. They just kind of disappear. But if you want to use them, you can make them pop by planting them in front of brightly colored plants or in front of a bright colored pot. Like red in front of a white pot, pink in front of lime green, totally works. Makes them pop. Now, if you prefer your pots to really blend in, which I do, go for the darker colors, your blacks, your browns. I like the artificial whiskey barrels because well, they're real cheap and they blend perfectly with the soil. So your eye doesn't go directly to that pot, it goes across the entire bed and enjoys the plants. Another thing that I learned, terracotta pots will always draw your eye directly to them. This can be beneficial to some of you if you really want to bring the eye into a particular spot. With me, it was too much. It was harsh on my eyes. I didn't want to pay attention to the pots. I wanted to pay attention to the landscape as a whole. For more information about some of the plants that I covered in this presentation, visit daydreamsconsulting.com. That is, if you're watching this on YouTube, then run over there, check it out. If you're in Central Texas, really bookmark that website. I've got so much plant information on there and gardening information on there that is for Central Texas, like our areas, Williamson County, Travis County, Central Texas. It is definitely specific for our area. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about shade gardening. Yeah, thanks.